Hello friends, welcome back to Program with Akshay, and we are going to continue the masterclass for AWS CDK. In this masterclass, we are going to create an REST API, and where we are going to see the templates and how we are going to create a REST API, where we are going to create a new sample application for the REST API, where we create lambdas and the REST API, and this REST API will so we have something called as API gateway and we have something called as AWS Lambda. So this API gateway will call the AWS Lambda and it will get all the details, like suppose we are going to get the JSON details where we are going to create what are the animals which are there in this world and their respective ID. It is just an example. So let's start. So I have created a new folder REST API app in my computer, and I have loaded in the Visual Studio Code. The first thing which we are going to do on the terminal section is we are going to create our application CDK, and to create an application CDK application, which we have seen in the previous video and which we have seen in the previous masterclass. The command is CDK init app hyphen language TypeScript. So the language which we are going to do the whole application or whole demo in this masterclass is TypeScript. So let's enter, and this will create our CDK application in TypeScript. So let's wait for a minute and let's the application get initialized. So our CDK application is been initialized. We have created our CDK application in TypeScript. It got almost like 4 to 5 minutes to do initialization because it was executing npm install. And after you are creating an application, make sure you are having the node modules folder. So inside the node modules, you can execute the node commands. Okay. So after installing the TypeScript language, after initializing the app, the next thing we are going to do is CDK bootstrap to bootstrap the application, and we can have our out folder where all the files will be placed, and select CDK out folder, and we can deploy this application easily. And we are going to create a Lambda folder as we have created in the previous section in the previous masterclass video. And inside the Lambda folder, we are going to create an sample application file or sample app.js file, and inside that we are going to write our JSON structure or JSON object, where we are going to return the to-do list or the to-do JSON object, like suppose which is having ID as like taking dinner, or which is having walking the dog, and so on. So let's create a folder called as Lambda inside this application. So I will create a new folder, or maybe you can do it this way. Create a folder called as Lambda, and inside that we can have something called as a new file. Let's say that app.js. Yeah, and we have created our new file inside the new Lambda, and inside the new Lambda where we are going to create our all the JSON object structure. Okay, so let's start. So after creating the object, after creating the Lambda, we are going to create an object for our JSON. So as we have created in our previous section, our Lambda, we will write exports handler, right? Exports handler, exports dot handler, which is having an async function and which is having an event ev and a context. Okay, which is having a Lambda, correct? And where we are going to return a status code. Okay, so what we are going to do, we are returning a status code, header and body. So we will return status code, something called a status code, which is 200, and we will return headers. Headers are nothing but our content type, content type or content, which is nothing but in JSON. Yeah, content type, which is application.json. Yeah, and we are going to have a body, which is nothing but our JSON structure. So for this, we are going to use JSON.stringify, and whatever the object which we are going to create, we will return that. Okay, so these are the properties which we are going to return. Now, to create the properties, what we are going to do is we are going to create a JSON object. So to create a JSON object, like suppose we will have something called as cons to do daily tasks. Okay, and where we are going to return and I'm having an array, and inside an array where we are going to have suppose task as taking meal, and after that we are having something called as bar id, and set the id as specify as one. So this is one object or one item inside the JSON, and another we are going to have a task, something called as preparing dinner, which is having an id as 2. So this is another item, and we will create two more items now. Let's copy paste it to speed up things. Correct. And we will something called as preparing or studying, which is having id as 3. Watching TV, which is having id as 4. Making bed, is having an id 5. So we have created our JSON object, good, which is having an, we are declaring that as an array or to do daily task, and inside that there are items, okay, which is having task and their respective id. Good. Now after this, what we are going to do, we are going to do a simple math function where we are going to return a random our to do daily task object, or we are going to calculate our daily task object, where we are going to get the how many items are there, how many lengths are there. Okay, so to do that, we are going to do is like suppose we are going to do something called as var item is equal to our to do daily task, where we are going to do a math function. Yep, well, if you have something called as math dot, yeah, math dot floor, yeah, floor, and which is going to have our math dot random. Is it m capital? Just a minute. M math dot random, yeah. And we are going to check our length, where we are going to do multiply by length. That's about it. Now we are going to create a function, okay, and inside the function we are going to call this lambda. Okay, so let's try to do that. Now next, what we are going to do, so we are going to create a function. Okay, so to create a function, in the lib folder we have something called as rest api stack.ts. Okay, so I'm going to delete this code and I'm going to delete the sqs. Now to create a function, we need to import the library. Okay, so as in the previous lecture in the hello world, we had imported the library function from AWS CDK lib slash AWS Lambda. So this is how you can create an actual function. All right, so now let's try to create a function. Okay, where suppose const get daily task is equal to new function, and the scope is this, and we are going to have a name get daily task app, right? And we are having something called as properties, something called as runtime, and runtime is our runtime dot node.js, and then we are going to pass our code or memory. Memory size is 512, and after that we are going to have code, and inside the code we are going to build it from assets. Okay, from asset, and inside the asset we will have join, where it will take the path folder, correct, as it is there in the previous folder, where it is going to have the directory name and the actual virtual name, correct. And we have dot dot slash lambdas, correct. And then we are, so our handler name is app dot, and we have something called as handler, correct. So app dot handler, so this is our handler name. Control Z, yes, app dot handler. Good. So we have created a new function, and inside the new function we are created our runtime environment, where we are specifying the code, okay, and from asset where we are joining, and from we are specifying the directory name and the folder name, and we have passed the handler. Okay. Yes. So we are getting some error here. So I will see code dot, and we have imported the path. Yes. Now, if you try to deploy this application, so if you try to deploy this code and deploy this function, so this will get deployed into your CDK application, into your account, and it will return the object. Yes, it will return all the handler objects or the JSON objects, and it will have all the like IDs and the task. Okay, and it will return the item, and we need to pass the item here. Now, the main agenda or the main goal of this application, we need to create an API function. Okay, so to create an API function, we need to create an API gateway. Okay, or we need to create an API gateway. And after creating an API gateway, we need to create a CRUD application, or a CRUD properties, or a CRUD function, where it can do the CRUD operation like get, put, post, and delete. So in our case, we are trying to get this all the details from the Lambda. So in our case, we are trying to get all the details from this Lambda. So I have explained you in the introduction, or in the introduction part of this video, where we are going to create AWS Lambda, which we have already created, where we have created a sample to do test task list. Okay, and we are going to create an API gateway which will get those all the details from the AWS Lambda, and we are going to see those in the console. Okay, so to do that, we have to import some of the properties in our stack. So let's try to import. So we have something called as import REST API, from AWS CDK lib slash AWS API gateway. Now we are going to import something called as star as API gateway from AWS CDK lib hyphen AWS hyphen API gateway. I will explain you what exactly is this. Okay. Now we are going to create a new API gateway function. To do that, we are going to have something called as const API is equal to new REST API, which is the scope is this, and we are going to pass a name, say like task app hyphen API, and we are going to pass some of the properties, like it will have a description, it will have the deployment options. So first we will try to pass description. So description, you can give anything. Okay, this is a sample REST API for to app list. Okay, so now we have our objects. Okay, and we have our already the API being created. Okay, so next what we are going to do, we need to create an actual resources. Okay, so what I mean by that is we are going to create a CRUD operation. As I said, we are going to have a CRUD operation, and inside the CRUD operation, if you are seeing, we have something called as get, put, post, and delete. So in this our case we have a get. So for this we need to create a CRUD operation, get sample API, get sample API operation, so we can list all our to do application. Okay, so now we are trying to create a new resource. Okay, so for the method to execute, we have to create a new resource for the API gateway. So to create a new resource, we have something called as const main path. You can give any name, API resource which we already created, root dot add resource. Yes, and give a name. Here we have something called as app. You can give any name. So we have created a new resource for an API gateway. Okay, now the CRUD operation, we have something called as get method. Okay, so get like something called as to do app slash and ID, like suppose 4. So we are trying to get a ID or fetch the ID with the help of get method, and we are trying to fetch those details. Okay, so for this we need to create like the main path which already we have created in the previous line, add method, and inside the add method we are going to create get. Yes, we are trying to create a get, and now we are going to pass a new we are going to pass the lambda function. Okay, now to pass the lambda function, we have already created the lambda function in the line number 12. Okay, where we are trying to create a new lambda function, and we are trying to create the runtime, and we have specified the code. Okay, now we wanted to execute those lambda functions. So to execute that, we need to pass like new lambda integration. Yes, and inside the integration, just a new lambda integration, new lambda integration, and inside that we are going to pass our get daily task. Yes, lambda integration. Why it is coming? Is it API gateway? Yep, API gateway. Yep. So that's about it. So we are had created the new main method where we are trying to get the actual method, and where we have created the resource. This line is about created resource, where we have created the REST API. After creating the REST API, we have created the resource, and where we have called the get method, and we are trying to get that lambda function which is having all the JSON objects. Okay, so yes, let's move to the next step. So to deploy it, first we have to synthesize the application. So let's try to synthesize it. So the command is CDK synth. So if we have any error, it will give an any error in the terminal, and if we don't have any errors, then we'll try to deploy the application. And let's wait for a minute here, and after synthesizing the application, we will have, yes, so we have an error here. Let's try to fix it. Okay, so the error says that it cannot find the assets at this lambdas. We already have a folder called as lambda, and inside this we have created the virtual path as lambdas. So very silly mistake. So let's try to synthesize it again. So we have command called as CDK synth, and after synthesizing, we will try to deploy the applications. Once it creates the CloudFormation template, we will try to push that into our account. So let's wait for a minute and let's try to synthesize. Yes, we don't have any error now. And let's try to deploy this application. So we have something command called as CDK deploy, and we will try to push our changes to CloudFormation, and we will have this REST API been created, and our Lambda is also been created. A new Lambda has been created, and we will try to test our application. Okay, so yeah, it is trying to push. Yes, so you can see that IAM policy is being created, and these are the IAM statements being created, where which is having effect as allow. Yeah, and ARN, this is the principal IAM policies, and these are the stacks which are being created. Okay, so these are reviewing progress. With REST API app stack is being created, and yeah, IAM role, and I guess it is being completed. Let's wait for a minute, and after this completion, we will navigate to AWS console, and we will try to check it. So once your deployment is done, we have got the endpoints. So these are the endpoints, okay, which are for the API gateway. We have created those CDK has created the endpoints. So let's check the endpoints. Let's copy that endpoints and let's try to paste those endpoints. Yes, and slash to do. And yes, we can see our object, JSON object being executed. So let's try to refresh and we have the second JSON item, and yes, we are able to successfully access those endpoints with the help of API gateway, and we can check those get calls through which the Lambda for which the Lambda has been created. So what is to do here? Why we have written to do? Okay, so the endpoint which we have got, these are the endpoints which the CDK has been created for us, and we had written slash to do. So if you notice our code, slash to do is nothing but where we are creating the resources dot root API dot API gateway dot root dot add resource and the name. So these are nothing but to do. Okay, and these are where when we are trying to access an API gateway, you have to copy this endpoint and the name of your resource path. Okay, now let's try to check the console and see what other resources has been created. Now let's go to console, and inside the console, if we can see the API gateway, and inside the API gateway, if you see, we have already the API gateway has been created for us, task API, and inside the task API we have something called as get method, and which is trying to invoke the Lambda. Okay, now we have something called as Lambda. Okay, now if you go to Lambda functions, and we have something called as Lambda. Yep, and inside the Lambda we have something called as REST API stack. Okay, and inside the REST API stack, if you see the code, let it get loaded. Yes, so this is the code which has been created for the Lambda function, and if we try to test it from here, let's try to test it and say test, and this has been executed, and we have something called as the status code, headers, content type, and the body which we had written in our code here. Yes, where we are returning the status code, headers, and body, and we are trying to stringify the JSON object which we try to return it. Now inside that, if you see, like, we have something called as monitor, and inside monitor, when we try to view in CloudWatch logs, whatever we try to log those in console, when we are trying to logging, when we try to do the logs inside the CloudWatch, this in this log groups, it will be get displayed. Like if you wanted to add any error, what exactly the object it is trying to return, those will be getting logged into the console. Okay, so this is how the we are trying to do the login in AWS. Okay, now if you go to configuration section, if you can see the configuration section, we have something called as, this is the role name which is trying to execute the Lambda. Okay, and these are the statements policy which is trying to execute the Lambda with the help of an API gateway. That means API gateway is trying to invoke the Lambda, and we need the Lambda role where we are trying to get those all the details in JSON objects. Okay, so these are the ways where we can try to invoke the when we are trying to create an API gateway, how we can invoke the AWS Lambda, and how we can get all those objects, JSON objects or XML objects with the help of an API gateway. So this is all about how we can create an API gateway in AWS, REST API gateway in AWS, and how we can create those AWS Lambdas, and how we can create those complex JSON structure, and how we can invoke those. So thanks for watching. Have a great day and happy learning.